I came to Walser because a friend of mine read Jakob von Gunten in the English translation. This was in the mid to late 90s, and said I absolutely had to read it. And I didn't listen to him at first, but he insisted. And I got myself a copy in German and was totally blown away. I'd never read anything like it. There was something so strange that I couldn't put my finger on. I think that's what I like best about it, is that it was utterly idiosyncratic, but I didn't know what it was that made it so unusual and unique. I immediately read the Spaziergang after that, and then bought up as many of the volumes of the Sämtliche Werke that I could find, and just fell in love with his work, and went to graduate school a few years later with the desire to write a dissertation on him. It's hard to explain what is so incredible about his writing. I think for me, as a non-native speaker of German, coming to his sentences, which are so outrageous and perfect at the same time, he's syntactically really complex and playful in an unusual, surprising way, just on the level of syntax, just the way the sentence unfolds, and so it's not just about what he says, it's how the sentences move, the rhythms, the digressions, the surprise shifts mid-sentence. They're really just stunning. So that passion did lead it to actual academic work at some point. Part of my dissertation was on Walser, and I wrote on his digression. And I've since written a number of articles and contributions on various aspects of his work. Most recently, I've been interested in the idea of unknowing or not knowing, ignorance, dumbness, inanity in his work. And the talk that I gave today was about the poetry, which is usually considered to be marginal to his work, though he did write quite a bit of poetry, and it was in fact the first, his first publications were poems in the late 19th century. 1897 were his first official publications in a newspaper. And he wrote a lot of poetry at the beginning, which dropped off for a couple decades while he focused on prose and novels, but then he picked up in the 20s, began writing a lot of poetry again until he was institutionalized in the 30s. And my talk today was about the different strategies of disruption of form in the poems. So I looked at the early poems, which are ostensibly conventional. On the surface, they seem to be pretty normal 19th century song form, really regular metrical patterns and rhyme schemes. But I looked at the way that he purposely disrupts those forms by using repetition, so that poems that might seem conventional on the surface with really simple structures and simple words actually become very odd and very strange. I have one example here. The poem is called Zeit. I'll just read the whole thing. It's so unusual in its insistence on repeating the word, which is the title of the poem. Ich liege hier, ich hab ja Zeit. Ich sinne hier, ich hab ja Zeit. Der Tag ist dunkel, hat Zeit. Mehr Zeit, als ich mir wünsche. Zeit habe ich zu messen, lange Zeit. Das Maß wird größer mit der Zeit. Nur etwas übersteigt die Zeit. Das ist die Sehnsucht. Keine Zeit ist zeitig mit der Sehnsucht Zeit. So here you have a poem which doesn't rhyme because it insists on repeating the word Zeit, which is the final word of every line, over and over again. And what's this repetition becomes a way for him in this poem and in other poems from the period to push the boundaries of what a word can mean, so that if you repeat a normal word over and over again, it actually stops making sense. This is something that linguists have noted, and it's something that you can practice yourself just by picking a word, a normal word, and if you say it, I don't know, after about 10 or 12 times in a row, it starts to sound funny and lose its meaning, and you start to notice the sound of the word and not pay attention to the meaning. And that's precisely what he performs with this poem and in other works. And then I also looked at the later poems from the microscripts, the Mikrogramme, in which he is, on the surface, much more experimental, much more playful with poetic forms, shifting line lengths, and no coherent content. He's constantly moving from one topic to the next, as is typical of his prose works. But these poems are particularly strange because, despite the fact that he's on the surface playing with poetic forms and is being much more experimental, he's using rhyme, which is one of the most conventional of poetic forms, right? Dating back to the beginning of poetic output, and so rhyme then becomes his way of, in a paradoxical way, disrupting the poem by using a conventional form. So he actually uses rhyme to an extreme degree, rhyming words that are very unusual, that normally aren't rhymed, or rhyming the same word on the same sound over and over and over again, and that's one of the strategies that he uses in the later poems, and I find both of these to be really interesting, and to look at the way that what makes him distinctive as a writer is his tendency to want to empty out language of its meaning, and so he never abandons it completely. He doesn't do anything like what the Dadaists do in the teens here in Switzerland, which was to write nonsense poetry. He doesn't go that far, but he puts in tension the semantic properties of the poem, its meanings, with the pure sound of the language, and he does that by using repetition and rhyme. On a philosophical level, I mean, what the poems are doing with ideas, let's say, roughly, generally speaking, is really interesting, because instead of striving to articulate some complex ideas, he generates a whole bunch of unusual, let's say, information, words, that could lead to ideas, but he juxtaposes them and strings them together in such a way that they don't ever really end up articulating something coherent. And so on the one hand, he's generating a lot of meaning, but on the other hand, that meaning is emptied out, or is excluded, or is undermined in some way, right? Either by some of these techniques that I described earlier, or by other means, or simply by means of the fact that the poems themselves, and this goes for the prose works of the later period as well, purposefully, and he does this purposefully, eschew a larger coherent narrative or idea, right? And instead perform a kind of jumping from idea to idea, a desultory, digressive movement, almost like a train of thought. But it's very stylized, and it's highly stylized. So it's always as if he seems to be putting on a show for us with language, right? And is self-aware, is fully aware of what's going on. So he's playing the clown. He's putting on various masks, right? And this is, I think, one of the one of the peculiar features of Walser's work in general that also has gained him so much. That has made him so influential, and one of the reasons why, to answer Thomas Hirschhorn's question for the whole sculpture, why he is important.